It doesn't matter where you try to hide in this world. It seems the unexplained and supernatural will find you. Whether it be encounters with ghosts, supernatural creatures, or the extraterrestrial kind, these stories will genuinely freak you out. If you have a story you would like to share in a future video, whether it be an unexplained event or something else, be sure to submit it at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. I'd love to share your story with everyone here in the swamp. It's stories like yours that keep this channel going. Now, joining me today is my good friend from the Deadline podcast. He narrated story number 2, and if you enjoyed his voice, please be sure to check him out. The link to his channel will be in the top of the description. Before we get into the stories though, I do have a sponsor, and they're gonna explain to you just what they do.
Do you love horror stories or weird fiction? Enter Maeltopia, a new world of horror fiction. Maeltopia is a YouTube channel audio series that features horror, dark fiction stories, in series that take place in the same strange universe. Listen to the Shepherd of Wolves series, where a killer who uses the bones of his murdered family as weapons is lured into a dark and mysterious game. Discover the Lost Journals and Tomes series, which delves into the many events and people of Maeltopia through first-person accounts. Or check out Maeltopia Tales, gripping stories that explore the macabre nature of this bizarre and haunted world. All series and stories intersect and influence each other, providing horror lovers an immersive experience. Just go to YouTube and search for Maeltopia, Maeltopia, a new world of horror fiction, or just click the link to our channel in the show notes below. So come visit us and join the darkness.
One last thank you to Maeltopia for sponsoring this video. Please check them out as their links will be in the description down below. It is honestly one epic series. You can also download Maeltopia on Podbean and just about every other podcasting platform. Now let's get into these stories that'll freak you out. This is going to be kind of a long story, so please bear with me. Saturday night, me, my friend, her boyfriend, and my boyfriend decided to make a Ouija board, and it worked. It started off slow, and then we connected to a specific spirit who wanted to contact our friend Zoe. The reason for this is because Zoe's biological mother had passed away around this time last year, and it had a message for her regarding her mother. The spirit now watches over me, my boyfriend, Zoe, and her boyfriend. My boyfriend and my best friend's boyfriend were skeptical, and now because of this experience, they believe. Here are some things that have happened or have been said in the first session we had. One of the first things that was said to Zoe was Vicky, which is her now past biological mother's name, and then the word books. We all looked at each other confused until Zoe looked at us and said, "I used to read Vicky books in the hospital when she was brain dead," which made Zoe burst out into tears. The board then spelled, "I heard," which made us realize that her mother heard her while she was reading the books. We then asked the spirit if any of our loved ones had messages for us. We all have had someone pass. My boyfriend's grandfather. My mother had a miscarriage. Obviously Zoe's mom, and Zoe's boyfriend's grandfather. My sister, the spirit said I was going to have a sister, and her name was going to be Marie. I asked my mother if that was true, and she confirmed it was going to be a girl, and she would have named it Marie. Her message for me was, "You're okay," which made me burst into tears. My boyfriend's grandfather said, "Good job." He asked at what, and it replied, "Everything." Zoe's boyfriend's grandfather said, "I love you," and then the one that gave us all chills, all it said for Zoe was, "She knows." We looked at her and she said, "When Vicky was brain dead, I kept telling her, 'I love you, I hope you know that.'" We had talked to the spirit for 4 hours during the first session. We considered it our friend, which is extremely confusing but kind of comforting. If anyone is interested, I can also send in what happened the other 2 nights. We're not sure what else to ask or if anyone can give us any advice. It would be greatly appreciated. I can feel the energy of this spirit and it feels extremely positive, but when the sun goes down, it kinda feels different, I don't know. Like the air's more charged or something. It does seem somewhat benign, but it's very protective over Zoe. I'm not entirely scared by this spirit, but I am curious if anyone has ever experienced anything like this before. And if this energy keeps escalating, should I be worried?
My sister and I have had paranormal experiences our entire lives. She's been able to communicate with spirits since she was very young, and I honestly think she would make a great medium if she wanted to. We moved into a new house in 2003, Mom's current home. The first experiences were mild. I see a girl about my sister's age walking around and think it was her. Or we would wake up to all the cabinets in the kitchen being wide open and the lights turning on and off. No big deal. We were used to it. We got a Ouija board for a holiday around my sophomore year of high school. We decided it would be a good idea to try and figure out who this little girl was. We made contact with her on our very first attempt. She explained that her name was Abigail, and that she had died in a car accident at the intersection past our house. We thought it was very cool, and we started conversing with her on the daily. Eventually, we got brave enough to ask if there were any more spirits around the property. Abigail was always very responsive and would answer any of our questions, but not this one. She responds with, "He won't let me say," or "he's watching." Of course, we being the young and dumb kids that we were, we kept pressing the issue for many weeks. Fast forward to summer that year. I started waking up to my closet door open at night or my overhead light being flipped on. My sister started swearing her bed would shake just as she was about to fall asleep every night. My parents wrote it off as us scaring ourselves playing with the board and would hide it from us. Eventually, we stopped looking for it. One day, we came home from school way before either of them would get off work. I went to my room to put my things away. I opened the door and there sat the board on the foot of my bed. We assumed our parents changed their mind about it since we had long stopped telling them when things happened of a paranormal nature. We were excited it was returned and wished to speak to our ghost friend promptly. We made contact and nothing was out of the ordinary. When it was close to time for my parents to arrive home, we tried to end the conversation, but she just kept saying, "He's coming tonight," over and over. We were both understandably rattled and made the decision to end the game, without her saying goodbye. We turned the board over in the box and I hid it away in my closet. That night, I woke up as usual to my closet door sliding open. I turned slowly to look at it. I saw nothing at first, but then I noticed a corner of my room was much darker than the rest, as I had started sleeping with my bedside lamp on. I stared closely, afraid to move or get out of bed. I could make out the figure of a man. He was abnormally tall and the whites of his eyes glowed unnaturally in the light of my lamp cast. I finally got the courage to sit up in my bed. He immediately lunged at me, hands around my throat. I felt the pressure of his fingers stifle any breath that was in my lungs. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. He was on top of me now. I felt his warm breath in my ear, and his grip tightens. My whole body was pressed into the bed. I couldn't move, even my fingertips. I tried my best to scream to no avail. I couldn't breathe, and I began to panic. His presence was so dark that not even my lamp was a match for it. The entire room went dark. I don't know if it was from me being on the verge of passing out, or that he was blocking out all the light. I did the only thing I could think of. I started reciting the Lord's Prayer over and over in my head. The whole incident seemed like it lasted an hour, but it couldn't have only been a couple of minutes. I continued to recite the prayer. His grip let up, and he whispered words in my ear in a language I had never heard. His hissing voice sent my whole body into shock. The room grew light again, and I felt him crawl off the end of my bed and heard the closet door close back. I was paralyzed in fear. I laid there taking it all in for several minutes until I heard my sister scream from the next room. I mustered all the courage I could and sprinted across the hallway. My sister was sitting at the foot of her bed, rocking back and forth, sobbing. I tried to ask what was wrong with her, but I couldn't understand under all the sobs. When she finally calmed down enough to speak, she still didn't. She slowly turned to me and held her hands up, palms facing me. I was confused at first, but upon closer inspection, I saw them. One perfect prick on each of her fingertips. The blood had pooled in her palms. I saw hand-shaped bloody prints on her bed sheets. She refused to tell me what had happened, but promised she would when it was light out. We gathered our blankets and headed to the living room to finish out our sleepless night together. My neck was still aching and it hurt to talk, so I decided to go to the bathroom and get some water and wash my face. I flipped on every light in the rooms and hallway that I passed through. When I finally arrived to the bathroom, I shut and locked the door behind me. I stood facing the mirror with my hands perched on the vanity for a long while, too afraid to look. When I did, I saw the bruises around my neck. There were perfect finger marks. I took pictures of them that, of course, are lost now, to show my parents in case they somehow vanished in the night and they didn't believe me. We spent the rest of the night awake and jumping at every sound we heard. We talked about the events when the sun came up, and we both vowed to never touch that board again. A vow we kept for several years. We tried to burn it and bury it, but it kept showing back up. We decided to hide it deep in my mother's woodshed and hope it never saw the light of day again. It didn't help, though. We had already opened the door. We both had several run-ins with this being for the next few years. I moved out the year after I graduated high school, and I still refused to be there at night by myself for any reason. My mom and sister still live in the house. The activity has died down over the years, but my sister still has experiences with spirits she believes just to be passing through. Abigail is still there, and we believe she stays to warn them if the man is ever coming back. My father cleaned out the shed a few weeks ago, but only found a planchette. We expect the board to show up any time now. I could tell all the stories, but it would be a novel. If anyone is interested in more, I would be happy to tell them.
I purchased a Ouija board from Amazon thinking this was all bullcrap. I had some friends over and we popped it out. There were 3 of us who were playing it. We had both of our hands on it and were asking questions. Nothing was happening. We'll leave the slider on the board and leave the room. When I come back, the slider has slid off the board and onto the floor. Needless to say, we were pretty freaked out. Ever since then, my house has seemingly come alive. I've seen dark masses peeking around corners multiple times. I look and it goes away, and then it appears when I look away again. My parents and brother have also said they've seen and heard weird things since then. Their name being called when no one calls it. My brother claimed his phone charger slid across the floor. I had a different friend over a few weeks ago, and he woke up in the middle of the night and saw a tall, dark figure standing in the doorway watching him sleep. I asked everyone in the house, and they claimed that it wasn't them. Last night is the tipping point. I woke up at around 3:15 and saw a dark figure at the end of my bed. There was no face or distinct features, just a very big, very dark mass. It was darker than darkness. It disappears in front of me and I just felt so cold. I managed to go back to sleep and woke up throwing up this morning. I don't know what I brought into that house, but let me tell you this, Ouija boards are not to be played with. I got my brother and his girlfriend to play it with me to try to tell this thing to leave. And this time the entire board moved by itself. Nobody was even there. I do not think anybody else moved it or any pranks are being played, because why would anybody do this? They would have told me by now. This has been going on for months. None of us really have any answers for this, but if any of you guys know, it would be greatly appreciated. I've had so many strange and unexplainable occurrences in my life. From a UFO sighting to a few ghost/shadow figure sightings, it's sometimes hard to know which ones stand out the most. So, I'll go with the most recent one. Back in 2015, while I was finishing up college, I worked as a night custodian for the city school district, and I got on at its newest middle school building. It was a neat place, one of those more modern global schools. Sadly, that was the worst job I've ever held in my life for the reasons I'm about to discuss. For starters, I'm usually not the type who likes to get into a lot of unwanted confrontations, but a week or 2 before the school started, the manager and I, whom I'll call D, got into the ugliest argument I've ever had. Not like a slight disagreement, I mean one with lots of yelling and cursing involved. Whether it was something D did or I did, whatever the case, stress or misunderstandings, we both tried to move on. Usually, I'm supposed to come into our building an hour before school lets out, which is why I still notice what goes on with the staff and students. Anyways, skipping ahead a few months into the first school year, I immediately saw that many of the students are always in trouble. I'd come to work to see some of them out in the halls getting chewed out by the dean almost daily. Then, about a month or 2 before the end of the year, there had even been a report of fights breaking out among students, about maybe 5 or 10 times a month. I kept thinking that this was very unusual, even for a middle school, but the bizarre stuff happening late at night never stopped there. When the whole crew was in the office with our runs complete, we'd all hear sounds out in the hallways. Not the average clangs of AC units shutting off or metal crackling from the heat of the day. We all knew what we were hearing. These were footsteps walking down the tiled hallways. Also, the sensor-activated lights would come on at random. And the only time it's supposed to happen is when they detect movement in the main lobby. Not only were we all supposed to be the only ones in our office, but also in the entire building. Then, one other night, I was walking around the building outside, checking all the doors as the run requires. Right as I'm about to leave the playground on the north side of the building, I stopped dead in my tracks. About 15 feet away from me, I saw what looked like a white and misty, like a wisp of snow. but I knew the shape well enough for it to scare the absolute daylights out of me. It was a pair of legs going through the cement stairs toward the playground. As I made my way to the front of the building, I walked the rest of the entries. I was walking mainly backward just to make sure nothing was following me. When I came back to the first set of doors, I found I got into the building and checked the noises throughout the building. After a few years of working there, I had to move back home after college officially ended. But one of the reasons for quitting that job was that school itself. Despite the building being brand spanking new, I believe without a doubt that place had a paranormal entity living there, causing all the conflict and ruckus among the students and staff. This experience, and a few others before it, have affirmed my belief in a supernatural world around us. When I was a child, we lived in an old mansion that was converted to apartments called the Hetzel House. We lived in the attic apartment, and as children, we used to be hearing footsteps walk up to the bed with no one there. We grew up used to it, and were not really afraid of it, or what was in that attic. One night my sister was lying in bed. She told me to look into the kitchen from our beds. We could see the pots and pans float from the dish rack to the floor. By morning, they were back on the rack to our amazement. Many people in the other apartments talked about the strange things happening that could not be explained. One lady burnt her waffle iron. When she got home, it was clean. Another left a pot of boiling water only to find that it was turned off. My mom left the apartments with the windows open once. We got a surprise rainstorm while we were out. But to our surprise, the windows were closed when we got home. Good things happened and no one seemed to be afraid. My grandmother came to visit us, but after hearing all the footsteps, she swore that she would never visit us again until we moved from Hetzel House. Now, for the scary parts. Our bedroom was a long, narrow room with a large window cut into the slant of the roof, with a little side window on the side. It was basically like a little cutout platform. So in the cutout piece of the roof, there was a little flat section that no one could get to, but someone could stand on. It was a night of wind, blowing and whistling just like in the movies. I could see out through the side window, and to my horror, there was something dark on the roof. As silly as it may seem, I definitely saw something with a top hat and a cape. It was flapping in the wind. This thing was making frantic, jerky movements, feeling all around the edge of the windows. I could see my mind's eye long, bony fingers feeling frantically for a crack. Just a crack in the edge of the window so it could enter our bedroom. I felt a chilling fear. I laid there, shivering for a minute, resting, and then another bout of shivering. I was scared like never before. I felt pure evil from this being. I wanted to run by the window and get my parents, but I knew if I passed the window and looked at this thing, I would die. So I laid there shivering in spouts. I was panicking, until all at once I heard an audible voice say, "It's okay to go to sleep," in a raspy, gentle woman's voice. I felt this good energy was at the window keeping this thing out. After the voice, I immediately felt peace. I was calm and directly fell asleep. I never said anything, and didn't want to think or even mention about it, ever. Fast forward 20 years later, I had another scary event that I may send later. I was talking to my sister about how my knees were weak, and I sensed extreme evil, like the time I saw something on the roof at Hetzel House. My sister turned white. "You saw that too?" The hair went up on both of our arms. My God, we both saw that. We compared notes. The top hat, the cape, the bony fingers, the wind, the frantic movements. The only difference is my sister didn't hear a calming voice and spent most of the night shivering and scared. and having to go to the bathroom but afraid to move. To this day, my sister cannot sleep near or look out a window at night. A year later, she called me. She was in New Orleans, and Death was a skeleton with a top hat and cape at a parade. I felt it was death. I felt if I saw it, I would die, even though, with it being outside on the window's ledge and it couldn't get to me, I still felt that I would die. I know there are stories about the Hat Man. I'm not sure exactly what it was, but what was in the apartment kept us safe. The house has been torn down since. I miss that place. As children, we felt safe in the attic of a house, which seems unusual. Very few attics are places of good energies. Me and my dad loved hunting. We'd go every year. I was 12 when one morning we woke up at around 5 to go to the stand. My dad always liked to be up unusually early. We arrived at the gate and drive up to our small cabin. That's where we always unloaded our side-by-side. Well, I'm given the option to drive myself to the stand or my dad can take me. I wanted to seem tough, so I told him I'll take myself. I drove about 1.5 miles to get to my stand, and I usually park 10 yards behind it, so it was pitch black. There was no moon. I was walking with my flashlight about to get into my stand. Then, out of nowhere, I heard a loud sound, almost like a gunshot, but it definitely wasn't a gunshot. I freaked out and ran to my stand as fast as I could. Through the pitch black morning, I constantly heard footsteps constantly around under my stand, and 10 minutes before the light came, I heard and saw nothing. I never could till this day figure out who or what that was. Why was it circling me? What was that loud noise? Was it a ghost? Was it some sort of supernatural entity? Was it some sort of overlapping timeline? I don't know. I've read so many things online, and I think I'm just confusing myself the more I try to research into it. Has anyone ever heard anything like this, or experienced anything like this? Thank you, Swamp, for sharing my story. When you deal with surplus firearms, there is always a question hanging in the background. Does this have a body count? The iconic 1903 Springfield was the standard US Army rifle in the Great War, but most people would be shocked to find out that very few were used during the war. Before the US entered the war, our arms industry was cranking out pattern 14 rifles for the British, and when it came clear the US would have to join, the Army told everyone to make those rifles in .30-06 for Uncle Sam. After the war, we kept the 1903s instead of the 1917s, but when World War II came around, G.I. Joe went to war with a Garand. So, this morning, my cop buddies asked me to come to the police station. They led me back into a room and pulled out a pistol and wanted to talk to me about it. It was a P-64 or a Polis Makarov, the kind of thing that Soviet-trained armies gave to political officers and headquarters staff to shoot conscripts who were cowards or disobedient. They asked some general questions about it before they started asking me some really weird, specific questions about it. At a loss, I asked them what this is about. They tell me that they got it on a guy they picked up as a suspect in a shooting. I tell them that this gun more than likely hasn't shot anyone in 40 years. They ask me how I knew that. I tell them about the wear and chamber, the difference between Soviet 9mm and European 9mm, and they thank me. Of course, I couldn't tell them about the 3 ghosts in 1970s Polish Army uniforms that were hanging around that pistol that killed them.
"10 years ago, my parents took me away from the busy streets of New York City and to the quiet village of Grand Island. My father was a realtor, along with my mom, and before I was born, the two were successful at it. Eventually, Dad sank into a deep depression when he found out that business was slowing and all the money he had saved was disappearing. The decision to leave didn't go over so well with my mom, but she accepted it when Dad told her about our new home. If only I knew then what I know now, they would still be alive and I wouldn't be trapped here with that thing. The house was a single-story home with an old willow tree in the front and a backyard that had a thickly wooded area just 3 feet away from the porch. Almost immediately, our neighbors came out to welcome us to a community and to help us unpack. I was taken aback by how animated everyone seemed to be. They would laugh at almost nothing and smile. More than that, they all seemed to dress in brightly colored clothes like something out of an 80s movie. What creeped me out was that none stopped smiling. My mom told me that they were just trying to be friendly, since we are new here, so I pushed it to the back of my mind. Enrolling in the local high school was easier than my parents thought it would be, and within a month, I was already waiting at the bus stop. I met a few teens my age, but none of them seemed interested in speaking to me. After we got off, they all started whispering about me, and none of it was good. Yet, all of them, like our neighbors, wore clothes that revolved around white, red, blue, or yellow. Unlike me wearing mostly gray or black, this seemed to irritate many of them, and even scare a few. But for what reason, I don't know. Luckily, I was able to make at least one friend. Ruby was her name, and unlike the rest, she was at least interested in getting to know me. A relief after a very tough week. Ruby and I mainly talked during lunch, since she was one of those straight A types of students. Whenever she was gone, the other teens would bully me. They would call me just about every foul name you can imagine, until Ruby stepped in. Then they all stopped. She told me they only act that way because of how different you are to all of them. I sighed and said, "What do they think, I'm a deem?" She covers my mouth and urges me to hush. She looks over my shoulder, then slowly taking her hand away from my mouth and says, "Please, don't say it." Seeing her tremble, I changed the subject. Soon Ruby began hanging out less and less with me, down to outright avoiding me at times, as if I didn't feel lonely enough already. Her absence in my life and my parents' lack of attention caused me to turn to the internet for some kind of outlet. Music worked for a bit, but what really helped was when I found an antique store not far from my home. I loved antiques, and this store had plenty to spare. The shop was packed with wood carvings of gargoyles, books written in different languages, pendants with serpents on them. You name it, they had it. The only problem was the shop owner wasn't around much, so I couldn't buy any of it. Towards the end of another agonizing week in October, instead of going home, I went and visited the antique store, praying for some kind of luck. Fortune seemed to smile on me that afternoon, since this time I met the store's owner. The owner was a pale-skinned, red-hairdo woman, at least 30 years old. She wore what looked like a red dress with a black corset. She asked me what I would like, and if I didn't say, she would hand me something. Always, it was something I thought of, but didn't have the money for it. She didn't mind, since she needed to make some room anyways. "Until we meet again, Eric." I never said my name, but she knew it. If asked, she would only say that she's good at reading people, especially the ones being bullied at school. There was just something about what she said that kept me coming back to her. Ruby began to speak to me again at school, which made me feel a lot better, and for a while, things began looking up for me. She noticed the pendant around my neck and said that wherever I got it from must only have me as a customer. She wasn't wrong. One day my parents invited all of our neighbors to a barbecue, and among them was the shop owner. She drank punch with me, and when I asked her what her name was, she laughed. "The name is Lilith, and I thought you might like this." She passes a small black book with a red pentagram on it. She then said that if I have any questions, just say my name. She disappears into the crowd of people. The book was written in a dark red ink with instructions on how to conjure and bind spirits to either an object or myself. I asked Lilith about it, but all she could say was that it was a very old book and that if I decide to conjure something, be warned that not all spirits are friendly, and oftentimes what you ask them to do, they will do just not what you intended. It seemed odd that a shop that sold occult stuff like this book would stay in business in a town where everyone seemed like uptight suburbanites. But again, I pushed it to the back of my mind, and within a few weeks, I would soon be drawn to using it. Life soon went downhill for my parents, and me with parents demanding that I start acting normal. School kids would start beating me to the point that I needed to be hospitalized. 2 kids held me down while another started cutting my chest with a scalpel. Then as they started kicking my ribs, I could see Ruby grinning in the corner. She was never really my friend, and she instead was toying with me. My blood boiled to the point that I went numb with the pain. I had to stay in hospital overnight for observation. I found it hard to sleep as the light above my bed kept flickering and the room was becoming increasingly cold, to the point I could see my breath. Just then, suddenly, felt something almost like paper crumpled up in my hand. It was a piece of paper that looked familiar to the ones in the black book. The only picture on the page was that of a hominid creature with 2 curved horns, teeth, clawed fingers, and toes with 2 massive bat-like wings, along with what looked like a fiery halo just above his head. The name above it was Abaddon. On the back of the page were the words, "Come forth from out of the void and answer my prayer, O deathless one. The chains which bound you to the pit now bid ye the angel of hell and destroyer of the heavens." No sooner had the last words left my mouth than I began to hear the sound of chains rattling, followed by a low murmur that for whatever reason causes me to pass out. But between consciousness and unconsciousness, I see the bottom of a human wearing a tattered black cloak and chains dangling from his wrists. I was allowed to go home as my wounds healed overnight, to the surprise of both me and the doctor. In fact, it was like I was never injured at all. The school became easier for me, as the people who bullied suddenly had to stay home due to an illness. Honestly, it was great. No one picked on me, with nearly everyone parting away from me as I walked down the hall from class to class, like I had an invisible bubble around me. One day, though, that all changed, when a kid from the football team shoved me off the bleachers. He and his buddies laughed. Ruby ran up to one of them and began kissing him. I watched in shock as the teen was suddenly lifted into the air, Ruby screamed as she was dragged down the bleachers by her hair, and her boyfriend was flung into a wall. The thing was that no one was grabbing them. Something seized them both and then flung them like rag dolls. Ruby tried to blame it on me while her boyfriend had to be rushed to the hospital with a torn rotator cuff and a cracked skull. Everyone just kept looking at me like I was the one causing it, including my parents who were being yelled at by Ruby's parents. I wasn't doing any of it, and I knew it, but even when I tried to get some answers from Lilith about it, her store wasn't there anymore. There was no sign that it ever was. That night I went for a walk to clear my head, and within half a mile from my house, I got pulled into the woods by a couple kids from school. They hit me first with fists, then one of them hit me with a rock. I went in and out of consciousness. After letting me fall, all I could hear was them yelling, "Where is that noise coming from?" and "Holy crap, run!" Then, after that, only screaming until silence. It gets a little busy, but I suddenly feel myself being lifted off the ground, then walked home in the arms of someone in a black cloak. Then the dawn of the next morning woke me. My parents were out working, and it was only me at home. Thank God, it's the weekend, right? But that night, I watched the news as the bodies of the teens who attacked me began showing up on the news. They were half-eaten and their clothes were torn to shreds. The TV suddenly turns off, and as the moonlight seeps in from the window, I see a black, hooded figure behind me. As soon as I turn around, the figure has morphed into the creature from the page with blood dripping from its teeth. Though it stood upright and had, for the most part, human features, his voice was anything but human.
I am yours, and you are mine. The terms were never set, so I made them for us.
After that, I only see it in its hooded form, and everyone who just mildly irritates me is either seriously injured or killed. My parents haven't come back since Saturday, and I have a feeling he did something to them. Whatever you do, please be aware that although a demon that has been bound to you may do what you ask of it, just know that you need to name the terms painstakingly well, or otherwise the demon will set them itself.
My childhood home is in Mexico. I lived there for a couple of years after my father passed away, and then I moved. The house was built on top of a cemetery as well as a neighborhood around it. While living there, I've experienced freezing cold spots, heard voices, footsteps, felt someone or something caressing my feet through the blanket when I'm sleeping alone, among other things. Ever since I was little, and before I knew any of this, I've been feeling like I was being watched. I feel this most when going up the stairs. Our stairs are an upside-down U-shape, if that makes any sense. Every time I go up, there's a little balcony right behind me, and I always get the feeling that someone's watching me go up the stairs. My husband feels the same way. Anyway, I'm 27 years old now, and I experienced something that I cannot explain. I was sleeping in the master bedroom, balcony and hallway doors locked. It was about 3 p.m., and I was sleeping face up and covered all the way up with a blanket. I woke up to the sound of footsteps. It sounded like they were walking from the right side of my bed where my head and door were, to the left bottom side of my bed, right where my left foot was. I sleep very light, and I heard the footsteps from the moment they started. I opened my eyes and said, "Hi, baby," to my husband as I sat up and took the blanket off my face. To my surprise, there was no one there. I realized the door was locked, and no one could get in the room. as there was no way of opening any of those doors from the outside. This realization made me petrified. My heart started pounding, and I looked around the room and under the bed, even though I know no one fits under the bed. No one was there. I know this is real and not one of those moments where you're half asleep and believe you're hearing things. I had my eyes already open when the steps were still happening. I don't know what it actually was, but it was so scary. After my investigation, I covered myself up again, and I was terrified. I fell asleep soon after and only awoke when my husband got home from work. The weirdest part of it all was a lady I had met after that. She told me my house is a portal to the afterlife just by looking at it. The thing is, I never mentioned anything about what happened there. It was the middle of the night and I was at home reading a book called Little Woman. A storm was rolling in, but I love storms. Outside of the pain in my hand, that is. I love the pitter-patter of rain on the glass. A few hours in, I was on a page somewhere between 70 and 80, when I suddenly heard a soft tapping of a finger on the window. I went and opened the shades. I looked and saw no one. A little agitated but scared, I sat back down. I then began to hear it again. I slammed my book on the table, went to the window, opened the blinds, but once again, nobody was there. I slammed my door open and yelled, "Stay the heck away from my house, you degenerate!" I then sat back down, but no sooner had I sat down as when I heard it yet again. I went to the window only to see a figure about 7 feet tall with charred black skin, red eyes, and blood all around its face. This disturbed-looking figure also had a notably bloody handprint on his chest. I stumbled backward and blinked multiple times only for it to disappear. I went to the bathroom, washed my face, burned a piece of my hair, then went to bed. All through the night, the figure haunted my sleep. I awoke the next morning, drank coffee, ate breakfast, and opened my laptop. I FaceTimed my friend who asked if I was okay. I told him of the previous night's events. My friend's face turned white. He then said something that chilled me to my bones. A person of that description was going around the woods slaying animals and draining them of their blood. Upon hearing this, I immediately ended the call and decided to buy a 12-gauge shotgun, a knife, 7 crosses, and a lot of weaponry. I have yet to see that person again, but I'll be prepared if I ever do. Let me start by saying this was over 10 to 12 years ago. I'm in my early 20s now. This happened to our family, beginning in the house I was brought home to from the hospital. Multiple other homes throughout the state as well, and it finally stopped when we moved over 1,000 miles away. My family always believed in the paranormal. As growing up in Louisiana, all of us had encounters throughout our time there. But the darkest encounters started in the home I was brought to after I was born. My parents have always talked about this house, and it is the house they have had the most activity in. It started in my room. My older brother kept his toys in there, like the red and yellow car that you push with your feet, and it would move on its own out of my room and down the hallway and would then stop. Our oven would turn on to extremely high temperatures when our nanny was home, and she would report people banging on the front door when she was right next to it, but no one would be there. When my mom would be alone at night, when my father was at work, she would get creeped out and felt like somebody was looking at her. One time, she looked up at one of the vents in her bedroom and a green light would be coming out from it. This was honestly just the beginning of it all. As we moved to another home in the same city, not even a year or two later, In the second house, we had issues with our second floor smelling like rotten flesh and eggs in certain spots. Sometimes, there would be a 20-degree difference in other spots. This is the house I began to remember things in as we stayed in this house for a few years. The first memories I have of paranormal encounters were at this place in my room. I was asleep and would wake up not knowing the time, but I would always feel like someone was at the end of my bed, and sometimes I would even see a black figure sitting there. The figure never scared me, and I was more curious than anything. The odd part about this is I remember having a white bunk bed with nothing else in the room, but my mom swears I never had bunk beds and that I had a small toddler bed with other things in my room. After we moved out, we found out a teenager hung himself in what used to be the garage but was now turned into a tool shed. The owners tore down the garage but kept the concrete slab from it. The next house we moved to a few years later was where I experienced the darkest entities, and to this day I'm terrified to talk about it. I was maybe 5 or 6 years old at the time, and I lived on the second floor of the house with all but one of my siblings. My sister and I shared a room, but she only spent one weekend a month with us. It started with my older brother and I seeing black figures. He saw them outside his window at eye level with him, again on the second floor, and I began to see them sitting in our swing set. Now, to clarify, our swing set had our names engraved at the top of each swing. So, when I saw these black figures, they were always sitting under my name on my swing and would be looking at me. I would also see them at the edge of our property next to the laneway. These figures were almost see-through, but had red eyes, and I still remember it. The one event that will always have me, and my mom convinced it was a demonic entity, was when one night my mom was reading in her bed on the first floor, and my room was directly above hers. It was in the middle of the night, and she heard me screaming at the top of my lungs for her. She ran upstairs and saw me standing in the middle of my bed, screaming and crying and pointing to the floor. I remember looking at her and saying clear as day, "They're here to get me, Mom. They're all over the floor. They're all around me." My mom grabbed me from the bed and took me to her room. For the rest of the night, she heard scratching and banging and footsteps from my room, despite no one being up there. Things eventually calmed down when we moved to another part of the state, but we still had activity. None of the happenings were as bad as the last house, though. My parents got help for the addictions they had, which we think the demon or whatever dark entity has latched onto was eventually after. We eventually moved to the west and nothing has happened to us since. My older brother and I are only 2 kids who remember this, and we both still have our hair on our arms stand up and our eyes water when we talk about the dark entities. I will never go back to that house again. Thank you for sharing my story. My story is really short, but I think your show would enjoy it. I once stayed a week over to house sit for my goduncle. It's easy money for a 13-year-old. I got to play games all alone and was never told when to go to bed or what to do. I was on cloud 9. Throughout the week, something just didn't feel right. Things were moved around, but initially I didn't pay it much mind. I just thought, whatever. This was until the last 3 days, though. The events got a bit more serious at this point, and I found certain parts of the house to be extremely cold. It was like I stepped into a walk-in freezer, and I'd often feel like I was about to pass out. The second to last day and night, I thought I saw footprints, and I would often hear the cabinets close and shut over and over until 3 a.m. I didn't sleep because I was genuinely terrified. The final night is what I will never forget. I decided to sleep in the living room because it had crosses and Jesus hanging around. At 3 a.m., I felt something pulling and tugging on my blanket. It was like someone was trying to yank the blankets off of me. I pulled the blanket over my head, classic, I know, and the tugging continued. Then, I swear on my life, I heard someone laughing from my goduncle's room, which had a lock and key. Once my goduncle showed up to drop me off at home, I told him what happened, and he told me how some guy offed himself in his house. I looked up the guy and found the guy, and his name was George. As it turns out, my goduncle's house was haunted by a poltergeist or something like that. It's not the scariest story that you've probably ever been sent, but honestly, it really creeped me out. Being born and raised in Austria, you don't hear about many supernatural things in the modern day. That said, for some reason, I encounter a lot of these things. This story happened when I was 10 years old. Long, long ago, I know. We lived in an urban village with a large forest next to it. On the edge of town there was a playground. Right at the edge of it was the forest. One evening, my mom worked late shifts, and so I and my brothers were alone. We decided as we were bored to go to the playground. It was already dark when we arrived. Everything seemed relatively normal for about 10 minutes. We played tag and were having a great time. That was until I looked at the forest. In the forest, I saw something bright move. I pointed it out to my brothers, but they claimed to have seen nothing. Eventually, this thing was coming closer, and I saw it in a bit more detail. It was a humanoid entity. It was thin and slender looking. The way it looked was honestly just weird, unnatural. Here is my best description. Do you know these spots you get in your vision after you look at a bright light like the sun and then look away? It was basically like that, but in human shape and moving. As it walked out, I began to see more of this thing, or whatever you want to call it. There were tons of them all around the playground. Many of these beings were smaller, almost toddler-sized, and were seemingly playing on the playground. My brothers still didn't see it, and wrote it off as a joke. That's when suddenly things stopped in place. They turned towards a nearby hill and walked towards it. They seemed to walk into each other, and kind of, grew together. It looked like they grew into a tree. The tree stood there for a minute, and then grew more transparent until it disappeared entirely. This was the first big thing I saw. After that, I saw these things more often. After some time, they stopped appearing. Then, I started seeing these things again last week. I'm not sure what they are, but if I see them or learn more, I'll keep you posted on it. I've been having tons of nightmares over the years, and honestly, it's quite terrifying. Sometimes I would have dreams of ghosts, haunting some of my friends' and family's own houses, or going night fishing with a friend at my grandfather's house and hearing cries and screams. Sometimes I would say something and I would hear my own voice come back at me, coming from the neighbor's house across the lake or next door. Anyways, on to the story. This happened a few weeks ago. It was around 10 p.m. Central Time for me, and I was very exhausted, as it had been a very busy and exhausting day. I was out the moment my head hit the pillow, and soon after, another nightmare began. In my dream, I remember being in my backyard, playing with a stick or something like that. I don't remember exactly what I was playing with, but eventually I heard a crack, like someone stepping on a stick. I turned, and to this day I'm terrified by what stood before me. I saw a creature that had blue charcoal skin. I don't know how to describe it, but I'll do my best. It had claws, and its legs were twisted. The legs also had claws, and the whole thing looked like some four-legged creature with tall elbows and drool running down its mouth. It had sharp teeth, and it glared so fiercely I felt it cut through my very being. I ran back to the house and found the door was locked, and the creature, had made a monstrous roar. My mom came out and asked what was wrong. I explained everything, but she said that she is going to go check it out. She took forever, and I went out and saw the, thing, I'll call it that from now on, hiding in the trees. My mom said she didn't see anything. I guess I went outside to play. I know it's stupid to go outside, but it's just a dream. I remember seeing blue jays, and my parents came outside with the exact same stick I was playing with before, reassuring me everything was okay. Then I simply woke up. I am sharing this story because that creature has been stuck in my mind every day since the nightmare, and I hope I never see anything like that again, whether in a dream or in real life. When I was 12, my parents moved in some apartments in Sacramento. One day when I was still unpacking with my friend and my chihuahua Paco, it wasn't long before we began to feel uneasy, and my dog hopped up onto his feet, hair sticking up like a cat. Paco started to growl, and his growl grew deeper with every passing second, until he finally went berserk at the door. Keep in mind, it's just me and my friend and my dog at this point. Freaked out, we ran outside, but as we did, it felt like the apartment came to life. It was as though the energy shifted, and it felt like the place was shaking. We stood outside the remainder of the night until my parents got back home. Fast forward a few months, and I and my brothers used to play a lot of manhunt with the kids at the apartment complex. One day, it was dark and slightly foggy. I thought I saw someone standing in the middle of the two apartment complexes, so I chased after them since I was the seeker. As I was running towards them, I realized the figure was a tall and skinny and solid black-like shadow. It took off running once I got close enough to notice this. Surprisingly, it was gone in an instant, leaving only me there, tripping out. I called everyone to come out to there so they could see if something was up. The thing is, I saw no one come out of the direction the figure ran. Now, for the final part. I share a bedroom with my two younger brothers. The room is really tiny, so my bed is right in front of the door and only had maybe 4 or so feet from the end of my bed to the door. It was basically enough room for the door to open. Well, one night I was sleeping and I could hear someone trying to open my door quietly. I didn't think much of it, since my dad has tendencies to go to the restroom and would always come to our room afterward to check up on us and pray. So I lay there and was waiting to see my dad open the door to check on us. But what I saw instead made my blood run cold. It was the tall, skinny figure from before. It was standing there looking at me for what seemed like forever, but was probably just a minute. It then started towards the room before it proceeded to walk into it. I waited for at least 10 minutes, hoping I would see the bathroom lights turn and see my dad. Sadly, that never happened. The lights never turned on and no one ever left the bathroom. I eventually built up enough courage to run to my dad and ask him if he got up a minute ago, and he said no, really mad, and told me that I was dreaming before he sent me back to my room. I have never seen that figure again, but all I know is I forever will be keeping my bedroom door locked when I sleep. The following incident occurred at my parents' home that they're currently living in. The house in question is quite an old house with a lot of history. 150 years of history to be exact. The house itself is located near my hometown of Strathroy, Ontario. Near the house and across the dirt road is a massive cow pasture with a forested area around it. The house itself is 2 stories and has tall evergreen trees around it. As I said before, the incident in question happened in this place. However, many disturbing and creepy things happened here as well. For example, There are many times we've heard voices, seen apparitions, and at one point, we even captured a menacing-looking dog mid-growl. All that aside, the experience I'm going to tell you about happened at 1 in the morning. That night, my sister had her boyfriend over. Eventually, he needed to relieve himself. Something to keep in mind is that upstairs there are 3 bedrooms, a bathroom, and a walk-in closet. It was my sister's boyfriend, when he went to the bathroom, that realized the door was closed but the light was on. Slowly, cautiously approaching the door, he heard someone weeping. Thinking it was my sister, he knocked and asked if she was okay. It was at this point the weeping stopped. Hearing nothing, he once again asked if she was okay. Yet again there was no response. It was then he finally got the confidence to open the door. As the door slowly creaked open, he was left in shock at the realization that no one was in the washroom. On a different occasion, my sister swore she saw a girl in a nightgown walk from the hall to the bathroom. Upon closer inspection, however, she found no one inside the room. We did some research a little later on and found out that there was a woman in her 40s, who we will call Stacy, who passed away in the house. The cause wasn't something we could figure out, but one day my sister and I were in the basement looking for Christmas decorations. We found some names etched on the stone. Sure enough, Stacy's name was one of the names etched in stone. Thanks for listening to these creepy, unexplainable stories sent in by viewers just like you. If you enjoyed these stories, please hit that like button as it helps me out a ton. If you're new to the swamp, why not join us and hit that subscribe button. Turn on notifications to never miss a new video. I upload them almost every single day, on all things natural and supernatural. If you have a story that you would like to share in a future video, whether it be an unexplained story or something different, be sure to submit that story to swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. I would love to share your story with everyone here in the swamp. It's stories like yours that help keep this show going. If you're not aware, you can download all your favorite Swamp Dweller scary stories on iTunes, Spotify, Podbean, Stitcher Radio, and pretty much every other major podcast platform out there. If you enjoyed my friend, Gothic Rose's narration's voice today, please be sure to check out her channel and subscribe. The link to do so will be at the top of the description. I would really appreciate it if you guys would show her some love for helping me out. She really does narrate a lot of great stories. What did you guys think of these stories? I would love to know. Have you guys ever experienced anything unexplainable or paranormal? This series is probably the longest going series so far on the channel, and it's pretty wild to see that we're getting pretty close to 40 episodes. Do you guys think we should do something special for 50? Let me know down below. If you made it all the way to the end, today's code word is Blue Sound Wave. Comment that down below to let me know that you made it all the way to the end, and to confuse anybody who didn't. I appreciate you guys as always, and I'll see you guys soon with another creepy video.